If you like these videos, please check out my full course at www.lsat.totaltestprep.net with tons of clearly explained actual LSAT questions written by someone who's mastered test and helped others master it, and an evaluation period where you only pay if you want to continue.
So, looking at the movable sets. Now, the movable sets have several different important variations. The movable sets tend to be relatively more straightforward. So you'll basically just have the movable elements given to you, either listed out or expressed in some way. But there are certain variations that do appear with some frequency. So you can have elements that are duplicated. You can have elements that are created from combination sets, and you can have a movable set that is divided into subsets. Okay, so let's take a look at this game here. So dealing with duplicates. The game says that in a race, runners A, B, C, D, and E have charities X and Y as sponsors, and each charity sponsors 3 runners, with C being sponsored by both charities. Well, so what we see here is that we can have a movable set can have one or more of its elements be duplicated. And we see the diagram down here. We have 2 C's. There's only 5 runners, and this is a grouping game. We've got three elements per group. We've only got 5 runners, but there's 6 slots because one of those runners, C, is shows up twice. So this is what I mean when I say that you can have duplicates of elements inside movable sets. And there can be more than 2. You may not actually know how many there are duplicated. It might just say that there's multiple examples of a particular one, or you might see that there's less movable than structural. So somebody's going to have to go more than once. You may not know how many times, but the point is you can have multiple examples of a particular movable element. With respect to combination sets, you can have movable elements that are a combination or a product of 2 separate sets. Now, if we look at the game over on the right, it says that there's 3 athletes, A, B, and C, and they're each in 2 different events, the high jump and the long jump. So these 3 athletes are 2 different events, the high jump and the long jump, and the 6 events will be shown in sequence in 6 broadcasts. So for this situation, the situation is such that the elements are not listed out, but they need to be recognized, and the keywords are generally indicators that all elements of one set are associated with all of the elements of another set, and that those combinations will all be moved in some way. And that's what we have here with the athletes are all going to be doing the high jump and the long jump. So you can write that out actually in the way that I have it here, with the A, B, and C being the top letters and the H and L being the subscripts for that. And that's basically telling you that a movable element is going to be A in the high jump, B in the high jump, C in the high jump, and A in the long jump, B in the long jump, and C in the long jump. Sometimes students are like, wait, aren't those the groups? Well, they're not the groups, because up here we're told that actually the broadcasts are the structural set. They're the sequence. So that game will look something like this. You'll have the 6 broadcasts, and then you'll have B doing the long jump is broadcast 1, C doing the high jump is broadcast 2, etc., etc., etc. So this is what I call a combination set, where you're actually combining 2 different sets that you're given in order to create what is actually going to be moved around. The thing with this is that these are relatively rare. There's a couple of different ways of drawing them, and I'll explain and go through how to do it in more detail in some of the exercise sets that we'll be doing in the videos. But the point is that this is about as complex as it's going to get for these more complex movable variations, movable set variations, and this is relatively rare. We also have this situation where we're dealing with subsets. So looking at the game over on the right, we see that it says that runners A, B, C, D, and E win places 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the race, not necessarily in that order. So A through E are going to be placed in orders 1 to 5. And then it tells us that runners A, B, and C are professionals, and runners D and E are amateurs. So a movable set can actually be divided into subsets that collect together certain elements. So we've got the runners A through E, but here we also see that we've got both professionals and amateurs. So there's still only one movable set. Subsets are used to add another layer of abstraction, make the game a bit more difficult, but they're not another set. Or it's not, we don't have 2 sets here, or 3 sets. We have just one set that is subdivided into 2 separate groups, or I call them subsets, so not to be confusing with the word group. Now the question is, if you know who's going to go into a particular subset, then you're dealing with subsets and not groups. So another way of drawing this is you could use subscripts, and you could have A, B, and C with subscript B, and you can have D and E with a subscript A, and a particular game might look like this, where it's 1 through 5, and then, you know, B is a professional, and they're over in group 1, C is a professional, and they're in group 2, etc., etc., etc. So you can have this kind of situation, and the point of this is just, as I said over in that second bullet point, is just a way to make this a little bit more complex and a little bit more abstract and difficult, so that you have to keep track of who the professionals are in addition to who the runners are and which slots they go, etc., etc. But these aren't groups, because you know exactly who the professionals and who the amateurs are. One thing with subsets is that there's a difference between one movable set with multiple subsets and multiple movable sets. And the difference is that all of the elements in the subsets are actually going to be put into one structural set. So we're going to go into a lot more detail with this because we're going to have a video on multiple movable sets. That's a specific type of game. But if you see that they're all going into one structural set, as we see here, they're all going into those 5 columns. It's just essentially one row. Then you know you're dealing with one movable set. You're not actually being asked to do anything independently with the professionals and anything independently with the runners, with the amateurs. With multiple movable sets, the elements are going to be going into separate structural sets. So if this was a game that had multiple movable sets, then they could do that. If they'll just vary, vary a little bit, vary something slightly. You would have a row for the professionals and you would have a row for the amateurs. But that's not the case here, because they're all going together into those 5 slots. Okay, so to quickly summarize, sets are always going to be either sequential or grouping or some combination, the structural sets. The movable sets may have duplicates, they may have combination sets, or they also may have subsets. And familiarity with these variations will be helpful in being able to quickly set up a diagram to use for the question. So when you identify this stuff, you'll be able to quickly understand exactly how you need to set up the diagram so that you can do the questions more effectively.